Subcommittee on Rails, Pipelines, and Hazardous Materials will come to order. I ask unanimous consent that the chairman be authorized to declare a recess at any time during the committee's hearings without objection, so that adopted. Also ask unanimous consent that the members not on the subcommittee be permitted to sit on the subcommittee on today's hearing and ask questions without objection, so that ordered. As a reminder, if members wish to insert a document into the record, please email those documents to ti@mail.house.gov. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for the purpose of opening statement. When it comes to energy resources, the United States has been twice blessed. First, we've been blessed with natural endowment of natural resources of various types and compositions. Second, we've been blessed with the ingenuity and entrepreneurship and that spirit that goes with that to develop technologies capable to safety and effectively access, develop, and transport these previously unavailable resources to markets and consumers. The economic and security benefits of this bounty have been substantial. Overall, the domestic oil and the gas sectors support more than 10 million jobs and generate nearly 1.8 trillion in economic activity. The average industry wage is 65% greater than the United States average wage in other employment sectors. These jobs are spread across multiple industries, including manufacturing, construction, transportation, and warehousing. Our committee has an interest in ensuring this energy bounty is safely transported across the energy supply chain. Today's hearing will examine the need to reauthorize the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, or PHMSA, including providing it with new direction and authority over emerging energy resources and sources. Last Congress, the committee passed H.R. 6494, Promising Innovation in Pipeline Efficiency and Safety Act of 2023, or PIPES. It was reported out of the committee on a bipartisan basis. In drafting this bill, the committee solicited input from a wide range of parties and received 90 priorities from members and over 100 requests for pipeline safety stakeholders. In our country, roughly 3.3 million miles of onshore pipeline safety and efficiency carry natural gas, crude, oxygen, hazardous liquids, and other energy sources vital to our nation's industry independence. It is of utmost importance that Congress to ensure that PHMSA is focused on its core mission of advancing safe transportation of these resources. I'd like to welcome our people that are witnesses today. Mr. Andrew Black, President of CEO of Liquid Energy Pipeline Association. Eric Taylor, Director, Engineering Services, BHE GT&S. Emmanuel Paris, Vice President of Alex E. Paris Contracting Company, and Mr. Carum, Executive Director of Pipeline Safety Trust. Look forward to hearing your testimony. We yield back now and recognize Ranking Member Titus. It's an opening statement.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. As you all know, there are 3.4 million miles of hazardous liquid and gas pipelines in the United States that help deliver energy to all communities in all our districts. Over 11,000 of those are in Nevada, so ensuring the safety of these pipelines is a matter I take very seriously. In 2004, just to do a little history, Congress enacted legislation to create the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, or PHMSA. PHMSA's dedicated staff in the Office of Pipeline Safety ensures that the United States pipeline transportation network operates safely, reliably, and in an environmentally sound manner. States have also taken steps to improve pipeline safety. In 2021, Nevada became the first state to require annual leak surveys of all interstate natural gas pipelines. This was annual instead of every 5 years, I think it was. By identifying leaks early on, the regulations are helping prevent explosions at businesses and in residential areas all across Nevada. Late last year, also, you saw regulators in Colorado finalize rules requiring operators of natural gas pipelines to disclose more data on leaks. This data from PHMSA show that serious pipeline incidences have really improved. They've decreased by 34% over the last 20 years, and that's great. But despite this progress, there's still work to be done. In January of last year, 2024, 2 houses, for example, less than a mile apart in Jackson, Mississippi, exploded just 3 days from each other because of Atmos Energy pipeline leaks. The first home explosion resulted in 1 fatality and 1 injury. The resulting fire from the second explosion spread to a neighboring home. These incidences happened after Atmos had identified leaks in their pipelines in the area, but had failed to correct and repair them. Then in December of last year, a natural gas explosion in Avondale, Louisiana, killed 1 person and injured 5, and again, this pipe was operated by Atmos Energy. Congress has repeatedly made it clear that pipeline safety is a bipartisan issue, and I appreciate that. And that's why I'm concerned with President Trump's efforts to slash the federal workforce that will ensure this safety. Last Congress, as the chairman said, this committee approved a bipartisan pipeline safety bill that would authorize PHMSA to hire 30 additional staff members to implement pipeline safety policies and fulfill Congress's mandates. This was supported by Democrats and Republicans, as well as industry and safety advocates, because we all know that increased capacity will make pipelines safer for operators, for communities near pipelines, and for our environment in general. This legislation, however, never did receive a vote on the House floor. The Bipartisan Pipes Act of 2023 also included critical provisions to address PHMSA's safety workforce shortages, improve PHMSA's public outreach and engagement efforts, and strengthen penalties for pipeline damage and disruption. The bill also had provisions to help PHMSA prepare to regulate the next generation of pipelines and keeping up with technology. Congress invested in pipeline projects to transport gaseous carbon dioxide and hydrogen through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act. I want to be sure that the federal safety regulators have the tools they need to mitigate the new risks that are associated with these projects. In closing, I look forward to working with the chairman and other members of this committee to build on the bipartisan work on pipeline safety that started long ago and intensified last session so that we can get legislation across the finish line during this Congress. So thank you all for being here today, and I look forward to hearing your perspectives. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Now recognize the ranking member of the full committee. Mr. Larson, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Webster and Ranking Member Titus, for holding this hearing. The recent rise in pipeline incidents and deaths should be a warning call to this committee. Now, last year in the Northwest, we marked the 25th anniversary of the Olympic pipeline explosion in Bellingham, Washington, an explosion that claimed the lives of 2 10-year-old boys and an 18-year-old young man. The explosion released 237 gallons of gasoline into Whatcom Creek that flowed through Whatcom Falls Park in Bellingham. And so since then, for my entire tenure in Congress, I have fought to reduce the risk of pipeline incidents, promote transparency of pipeline safety information for local communities, and increase accountability for pipeline operators. And progress has been made, but certainly more needs to be done through legislation and rulemaking. PHMSA advanced 2 important rulemakings in December of last year, one on methane leak detection and the other on gaseous carbon dioxide pipeline requirements. The leak detection rule helps reduce pollution, limit unintentional methane leaks, and intentional venting. I want to be clear that President Trump signed this requirement into law in his first term. As well, The 2011 Pipeline Safety Act, passed 13 years ago, first required a carbon dioxide rulemaking. This requirement was made more urgent after a carbon dioxide pipeline ruptured in Mississippi in 2020. These rulemakings will increase safety. They are required by law, and the new administration should now quickly advance them after pulling them back. So they can do work already without us having to do more work. But now I want to turn to deadly accidents. According to PHMSA, in the past 5 years have been 3,070 pipeline incidents, killing 58 people, injuring 167 more people, and causing more than $2.3 billion in property damage. The primary reason these incidents occurred was due to material, weld, or equipment failures, all factors primarily within the control of pipeline operators. The NTSB, in addition to doing its great work investigating aviation accidents that we've seen over the last 35 days, has 9 open pipeline safety investigations, including one that launched this past weekend after a Kansas gas pipeline leak and explosion in Hutchinson, Kansas. More people are dying as well. 24 and 23 saw the deadliest pipeline incidents in more than a decade. In March of 2023, a UGI pipeline explosion at a chocolate factory in West Reading, Pennsylvania, killed 7 people, injured 11 people, displaced 3 families from a neighboring apartment building, and forced many more people from the area to evacuate. The chocolate factory was not rebuilt, and production has shifted to other facilities, leaving the town of West Reading, population 4,530, without a significant employer that had been in the community for 65 years. And more problems are occurring. There were more incidents in 2024 than there were in 23. Including one in my district in late December of 2023. The now BP-owned Olympic Pipeline saw another gas spill in my district. This time more than 20,000 gallons of diesel spilled near the elementary school in Conway, Washington. Emergency response took more than a year, and still hasn't been completely cleaned up. But more can be done, and we should work quickly to pass a pipeline safety bill similar to the one we passed last Congress. This committee unanimously approved a bipartisan pipeline safety bill that improved transparency by creating an Office of Public Engagement, an idea championed by Representative Strickland. This legislation also required PHMSA to review operator emergency response plans, and more funding will help. PHMSA and state pipeline safety programs need resources and staff to inspect pipelines, conduct investigations when incidents occur, and take appropriate enforcement actions so bad actors are held accountable. Our bill increased the authorizations for both PHMSA and state pipeline safety authorities. We also included $56 million for state pipeline safety programs over 4 years. But I'm troubled by the president's recent efforts to remove people from the jobs that play a critical role to hold pipeline operators accountable for their actions that might harm people. Just as an example, PHMSA assessed a $2 million civil penalty on Denbury Gulf Coast Pipelines and its contractor Republic Testing Laboratories for obstructing PHMSA safety inspectors from observing pipeline repairs and verbally and physically assaulting PHMSA safety inspectors. Employees of these 2 companies physically prevented a PHMSA safety inspector from questioning a welder, held up a screen to prevent a PHMSA safety inspector from observing a weld, and prevented a PHMSA safety inspector from photographing test equipment. These repairs were being conducted to replace the carbon dioxide pipeline that ruptured in Satarsha, Mississippi, that sent 45 people to the hospital in 2020. Denbury's behavior towards PHMSA safety inspectors, the administration's efforts to cut staff from the Office of Pipeline Safety, and to cut funding for grants that Congress itself, we all, mandated, including PHMSA's technical assistance grants, put communities at risk nationwide. Let's put safety in America first. Now, Congress has recognized that improving safety requires strong regulation and funding support. The BIL created the first ever natural gas distribution infrastructure safety and modernization grant program. And last May, PHMSA announced $196 million for 60 publicly owned utilities to repair or replace natural gas pipelines. This investment will reduce incidents and improve safety. We should keep it going. Pipelines play a critical role in the daily lives of Americans. We are here today to make sure the National Pipeline Safety Pipeline Network safely delivers energy across the country. I look forward to today's discussion and thank each of the witnesses today for your testimony. I yield.
Thank you very much. Again, I'd like to welcome our witnesses, thank them for being here today. Briefly, I'd like to explain our lighting system. Green means go, yellow means you're getting ready to stop, and red means stop. Pretty simple. The witness's full statements be included in the record. Without objection, show that ordered. I ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that might be submitted in writing. Without objection, show that ordered. I ask for unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for additional comments and information submitted by members or witnesses to be included in today's hearing. Without objection, show that ordered. As your written testimony will be made part of the record, we ask you to limit your remarks to 5 minutes. Mr. Black, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, ranking members. I'm Andy Black, President and CEO of the Liquid Energy Pipeline Association. LEPA represents pipeline owners and operators transporting transportation fuels like gasoline, diesel, and jet, transportation feedstocks like crude oil, home heating fuels like propane and heating oil, industrial feedstocks like ethane and butane, and low-carbon solutions like liquid petroleum gas, renewable diesel, and carbon dioxide. We have over 50 member companies delivering over 20 billion barrels annually across a nearly 230,000-mile network of pipelines. Thank you for holding this hearing today and highlighting the vital role this committee has promoting the infrastructure that leads to American prosperity. This committee has an important role ensuring our pipeline network is safe through pipeline safety reauthorization, allowing us to confidently expand our pipeline infrastructure. As the committee considers the role of pipeline infrastructure and what changes to make to federal pipeline safety laws, it's important to remember that pipelines are the safest way to deliver energy. More than 99.999% of crude oil and petroleum products delivered by pipeline reaches its destination safely. A report prepared by PHMSA for Congress, analyzing 10 years of incident data, found pipelines were 13 times safer than both trains and trucks, with pipelines experiencing only one incident for every 720 million gallons delivered. An Obama administration analysis found rejecting a major pipeline and shipping the same crude oil by rail would increase the risk of oil release by over 800 times and of barrels released by 2.6 times. Current PHMSA pipeline incident statistics also show pipeline safety is improving. According to publicly available PHMSA data, total liquid pipeline incidents are down 12% over the last 5 years. Liquids pipelines incidents impacting people or the environment are also down 12% over the last 5 years. Declining pipeline incidents over the last 5 years supports the committee's measured approach to reauthorizing pipeline safety laws without major changes or new mandates. LEPA does believe Congress can do more to help modernize pipeline safety programs because key parts of PHMSA safety regulations are over 20 years old and do not reflect the latest advances in safety technology or know-how. LEPA recognizes that America is blessed with an abundance of energy. Pipelines are the vital link from where that energy is produced to where it is refined into usable products and on to consumers and businesses in their home regions. Smart pipeline policies will promote the pipeline infrastructure needed to deliver American energy dominance. Lastly, LEPA believes Congress can help PHMSA increase the effectiveness and transparency of its pipeline safety programs and requirements. LEPA welcomed and supported the pipeline safety reauthorization bill this committee approved in December of '23. My written testimony details the many provisions LEPA supported, including these 6. Number 1, reforming PHMSA's special permit program. Number 2, strengthening penalties for pipeline safety violations that impair operations of facilities or damage construction sites. Number 3, requiring PHMSA issue an already congressionally mandated rulemaking on idled pipelines. Number 4, authorizing a voluntary information sharing to convene stakeholders to collaborate on safety initiatives. Number 5, requiring risk-based inspections of in-service breakout tanks to reduce unnecessary greenhouse gas and air pollutant emissions, reduce worker safety threats, and reduce hazardous waste when shown to achieve an equivalent level of safety. And number 6, improving pipeline expertise of PHMSA personnel with hiring authority for engineering, scientific, or other technical expertise. One final note on leveraging new technologies. In the 2020 PIPES Act, Congress recognized pipeline safety could benefit from harnessing the latest high-tech inspection technologies and analytics. However, PHMSA bureaucratic red tape in the last administration effectively strangled this program before it could ever start. An opportunity now exists, and LEPA supports restoring the will of Congress and reauthorizing this program without additional bureaucratic red tape or conditions. Thank you again for the committee's support of pipeline energy infrastructure and the opportunity to testify before you today on the benefits of pipelines, including their safety. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Taylor. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Webster, Ranking Member Titus, and members of the subcommittee. Good morning. My name is Eric Taylor, and I serve as the Director of Engineering Services for BHE GT&S. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on behalf of the Interstate Natural Gas Association of America, otherwise known as INGA, on promoting and improving safety and pipeline infrastructure. We appreciate the subcommittee's leadership and ongoing efforts to develop a measure that would reauthorize the Office of Pipeline Safety within PHMSA. INGA is a trade association specifically representing the interstate natural gas, pipeline, and storage industry. INGA's member companies transport most of the natural gas consumed in the United States through a network of approximately 200,000 miles of interstate transmission pipelines and are primarily focused on serving customers like local distribution companies, electricity generators, industrial manufacturers, and LNG export facilities. I've focused the last 10 years of my career on pipeline safety, and most recently have been engaged in the last 2 major PHMSA rulemakings, the Leak Detection and Repair, LDAR, and Class Location Proposed Rules. I was very involved in the Gas Pipeline Advisory Committee, GPAC, meetings in November 2023 and March 2024. We applaud the committee for employing a bipartisan strategy in the 118th Congress to reauthorize PHMSA pipeline safety programs for 4 years. As you begin your deliberations to draft and ideally enact a pipeline safety reauthorization measure, there are several points I would like to make on behalf of the natural gas transmission pipeline industry. First, the United States Department of Transportation, PHMSA, other regulators, and industry experts have for decades agreed that pipelines are the safest mode of natural gas transportation. INGA supports having a strong safety regulator and the robust, durable, and consistent regulations led by PHMSA to ensure accountability of operators. We take our commitment to safety seriously and appreciate PHMSA's role in ensuring the industry maintains its safety focus and the public is confident in the safety and reliability of natural gas pipelines. Second, INGA's top regulatory priority with PHMSA is completion of the Class Location Rule, which presents opportunities to improve safety, protect the environment, and possibly increase capacity of existing pipelines that have had their capacity reduced due to a downrate from a class location change. Class location change regulations have not been substantially updated in more than 50 years. Revising them has been an INGA goal for more than 2 decades. More details are provided in my written testimony, but INGA strongly supports the committee's prior mandate for PHMSA to complete this rulemaking within 90 days after the enactment date. Third, in the 2011 reauthorization, Congress required PHMSA to issue regulations for conducting tests to confirm the material strength of previously untested natural gas transmission pipelines. PHMSA completed this congressional mandate in the fall of 2019, and while INGA supported PHMSA promulgating this regulation, the agency made admitted drafting errors. Unless rectified, INGA members may be forced to retest previously tested pipelines with no added safety benefit, causing disruption to communities, unnecessarily venting gas, and costing operators billions of dollars. INGA commends this committee for addressing this issue in the PIPES Act of 2023. Fourth, the GPAC is an advisory committee to the department and plays an important role to enhance gas pipeline safety regulations. Historically, GPAC met regularly to consider important rules and discuss important safety advancements, but since January 2021, has only convened 3 times, despite its charter stating GPAC meet approximately 4 times per year. Further, there are times where PHMSA has disagreed with the unanimous GPAC decisions to final rules with providing a technical basis for why. While INGA does not challenge PHMSA's independence to render decisions, We believe Congress can strengthen transparency by receiving PHMSA reports on rationale and conclusions when issuing final rules. INGA appreciates the committee previously addressing both issues. Lastly, our industry recognizes the importance of data sharing and proactively attempts to participate in industry organizations to share lessons learned. INGA supports the bipartisan inclusion of language in your bill last Congress for voluntary information sharing. In conclusion, your efforts are vital to ensure PHMSA has the resources and direction to continually improve safety for our industry. I truly appreciate the opportunity to testify in front of the subcommittee today and look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Parrish, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Webster, Ranking Member Titus, Ranking Member Larson, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you this morning to discuss effective ways to improve pipeline safety and efficient pipeline infrastructure. I am Emmanuel Parris, Vice President of Alex E. Parris Contracting Company. We are located out of Atlasburg, Pennsylvania, and our company was established in 1928. We perform a variety of construction services, including the installation of large and small diameter piping, cross-country pipeline, utility construction, and a variety of civil and commercial projects. I'm here today representing the Distribution Contractors Association and the Pennsylvania Utility Contractors Association. DCA is a national association representing the entities who provide construction services needed for installation, replacement, and rehabilitation of natural gas distribution systems, as well as transmission pipelines in communities across our country. PUCA is one of the largest statewide utility construction associations in the country, serving excavation contractors in multiple underground facility markets. Because the vast majority of pipeline construction is contracted out to members of our industry, we appreciate this opportunity. While there are many facets to pipeline safety, our industry remains especially concerned with the enduring problem of damage to underground facilities during excavation. For the most part, contractors, operators, and leaders in damage prevention, like the Common Ground Alliance, have long supported the concept of sharing responsibility in damage prevention. Ensuring for accurate and timely locating and marking of underground facilities is fundamental to this process, and they are gaining attention. According to the Common Ground Alliance's 2023 Damage Information Reporting Tool, excavators face about a 50-50 odds of being able to legally start work on time due to utilities not providing timely locates. This obviously undermines the 811 process. According to CGA, failure to locate underground facilities accurately and on time was the root cause of 34% of facility damages in 23. Records of underground utilities can be outdated, inaccurate, or incomplete, and are sometimes unavailable to damage prevention stakeholders like designers, locators, and excavators such as ourselves. This committee's pipeline safety reauthorization bill, considered in the last Congress, addressed these challenges by proposing improvements to state damage prevention programs. Specifically, we believe state pipeline safety authorities should support and encourage adoption of leading practices to improve their programs. We believe state damage prevention authorities should be setting policies to reduce exemptions in the damage prevention process, require marking of all underground lines and laterals, including sewer lines and laterals, encourage robust training for locate professionals, and to promote and encourage the use of state-of-the-art technologies to locate underground facilities. Exemptions to the one-call or 811 process have been in the thorn in the side of damage prevention since one-call's laws were established. Exemptions for specific stakeholders or certain types of infrastructure do nothing but compromise the damage prevention process. While it's generally agreed to that exemptions to one-call participation are bad for damage prevention, it's important to clarify that participation means that all excavators notify their 811 center prior to excavation, and that all underground facility owners belong to their respective 811 center and respond to locate requests. I want to move to the need for improved mapping of underground facilities, and specifically the need to move toward geographic informations or GIS mapping. GIS can create, analyze, and map different layers of data by creating maps and scenes related to underground facilities, and allows for layering of data tied to geographic points rather than restricting the user to limited features on a static map. The goal of moving towards superior GIS mapping is shared by industries outside of the excavation construction industry. Support of these damage prevention provisions, especially related to GIS mapping, was shared by other national associations and organizations representing all of us. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act of 21 provided an unprecedented $550 billion in new investments in American infrastructure, and a significant portion of those dollars will go toward improvements to underground systems. That means that there will be an unprecedented amount of underground utility work coming forward. Our members also support provisions that would hold those physically attacked pipeline infrastructure more accountable. While most agree on the right to peaceful activism, including peaceful protests to pipeline construction projects, stiffer penalties are needed to hold those who engage in criminal activities during protests more accountable. It's important to include pipeline facilities under construction within the scope of this provision, and the excavation community would agree or argue that while interfering or tampering with the operation of pipeline would clearly compromise pipeline safety, vandalism and destruction of nearby equipment used to build a pipeline can be just as dangerous. The excavation construction industry looks forward to working with all of you on advancing pipeline safety reauthorization legislation to include language to improve state pipeline safety programs through promotion of several leading practices. I'd like to thank you again for the opportunity to speak with you today, and I look forward to answering any questions that you have.
Thank you very much. Mr. Carum, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Webster, Ranking Member Titus, Ranking Member Larson, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to speak today on the vital subject of pipeline safety. My name is Bill Carum, and I'm the Executive Director of the Pipeline Safety Trust. The Pipeline Safety Trust was founded after the 1999 Olympic pipeline tragedy in Bellingham, Washington. That entirely preventable failure spilled gasoline into a beautiful salmon stream in the heart of our community, which ignited and killed 3 boys. The U.S. Justice Department was so appalled at the operations of the pipeline company and the lax oversight from the federal government that they asked the courts to set aside money from the settlement to create the Pipeline Safety Trust as a national watchdog on the pipeline industry and its regulators. I look forward to the day when I can tell you that there have been no fatalities since the last time I testified, but today is not that day. The last 2 years have been the deadliest 2-year period for pipelines in nearly 15 years, since the 2-year period that included the devastating PG&E pipeline explosion in San Bruno, California, widely considered a low point for pipeline safety. I warn you that my message is largely the same as my previous opportunities to testify before the subcommittee, and that's because the state of pipeline safety is largely the same. We continue to languish with consistent poor performance, with a significant incident almost every day, and 30 people killed over the last 2 years. In December, the NTSB held a board meeting to discuss the 2023 UGI Utilities pipeline failure in West Reading, Pennsylvania, that killed 7 people and injured 11. The failed piece of pipeline infrastructure was made from ADDL-A plastic. PHMSA has known these ADDL-A components are prone to failure for decades. The NTSB is also investigating an Enbridge pipeline failure that occurred in November in South Jordan, Utah, that killed a 15-year-old child. The preliminary report finds that the failed pipeline was also ADDL-A. Atmos Energy, a large gas distribution pipeline operator in the Southeast, has had a string of deadly failures with troublingly common patterns. An NTSB investigation of a 2018 home explosion that took the life of a 12-year-old girl while she practiced her cheerleading routine found that the failed pipeline was part of an under-maintained system full of leaks that had led to fires in neighboring homes in the preceding days. Neighbors had complained repeatedly about the smell of gas. Atmos didn't find any leaks they deemed to be hazardous before the home exploded. Then just last year in Jackson, Mississippi, a pipeline-fueled home explosion killed the 82-year-old wife of a community pastor. An NTSB preliminary report found that the failed pipeline was part of an under-maintained system full of leaks that led to another home explosion in the following days. Neighbors had complained repeatedly about the smell of gas. Atmos didn't find any leaks they deemed to be hazardous before the home exploded. Again, if I'm repeating myself, it's because operators are repeating their mistakes that kill people. While everyone on today's panel supports the goal of zero incidents, unfortunately, we have a long way to go. I commend this subcommittee for working together on pipeline safety legislation over the last 2 years. The bill this subcommittee passed has some good provisions. Increasing civil penalties is a step in the right direction. When we try to chart penalties levied on operators against their quarterly earnings, we often can't even visualize the penalty at such a tiny percentage of earnings. So giving PHMSA more enforcement authority, albeit small in this case, is moving in the right direction. Additionally, increasing authorized resources to PHMSA and state programs is another move in the right direction. Not only has the agency been chronically underfunded, but the additional miles of jurisdictional pipe and the potential build-out of carbon dioxide and hydrogen pipelines demand an increase in resources from Congress. Thank you for answering that call. However, given the continued lack of progress on pipeline safety, we need more. There are many provisions in this bill that won't contribute to safety progress. Additionally, there are common sense, practical safety initiatives that would make a real impact on safety, such as fire shutoff valves. These devices can mitigate the damage caused by a house fire that could be made worse by the presence of gas service. The valve automatically closes when exposed to heat, preventing natural gas from adding literal fuel to the fire. These devices are inexpensive, require no ongoing maintenance, and can be easily installed on service lines. As you discuss how to move forward on authorizing PHMSA's pipeline safety program and make improvements to the law, I implore you to think of the empty seats at dinner tables across the country because of pipeline failures. I've been with families who have lost loved ones recently. I've been with families who lost loved ones over 25 years ago, and I can tell you the pain never goes away. Please give PHMSA the authority and the resources it needs to meet its responsibility to the American people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so now it's time for us to ask questions. If you're ready, we're ready. I guess my first question is, basically, Mr. Carum and others mentioned the fact that things just didn't get done. I'm wondering if last 4 years has had no administrator, nobody in charge. How does that affect the overall enforcement, no matter what kind of law we passed? Anybody want to tackle that? Mr. Black?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. LEPA applauds President Trump for nominating a PHMSA administrator for Senate confirmation. It is important to have an administrator to drive change within PHMSA, and PHMSA needs that change to improve the use of new technologies. An administrator can also help reassure the American public that comprehensive regulations govern pipeline safety, that PHMSA is on the case, and like the modes of other transportation networks, can reassure the American public that this transportation system is safe.
Anyone else? Mr. Parris?
So I think not having a confirmed administrator shows that there's it gives an uncertain regulatory environment. And if there is a confirmed administrator, it shows that the government is serious about tackling these issues. So I think it's very important that we do so.
Mr. Taylor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, we would also support having that individual confirmed, but we also can support and make sure that we work with the current PHMSA administration and make sure that we continue to improve on safety, and we've been able to do so through the last administration.
Mr. Carum?
Yeah, my hope and expectation is that pipeline safety is a bipartisan issue that rises above politics, and I think we've seen that through all recent administrations, including the last Trump administration under Skip Elliott's leadership. And seeing two members of that team returning, and Paul Roberti and Ben Kochman, leads me to hope and expect that safety-forward leadership will continue.
So if, pipelines are the safest mode of transportation by far. We understand that. But are the safety rules, regulations, laws, and other things enough, maybe just undirected by not having a leader, or is there something else we should be doing? Anybody want to tackle that one?
It's great that pipeline incidents are declining 12% overall and 12% on incidents impacting the pipeline environment, but our goal is 0 incidents. Congress has a role in that through pipeline safety authorization. So does PHMSA. Technology is improving. Engineering, analytics are improving. The way to improve pipeline safety further is to update PHMSA regulations to use this new technology and know-how through pipeline safety demonstration pilot programs and then updating of PHMSA's regulations.
Anyone else? Mr. Taylor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I'll build off what Mr. Black just said. We also agree with continuing to leverage new technologies. We're part of several different associations, organizations, one of them being Pipeline Research Council International, where funds are collected and developed to improve technology and figure out ways to leverage that new technology and incorporate it. So sometimes PHMSA is not as quick to adopt those new technologies, and so we'd be looking for PHMSA to find avenues to be able to do that if it's recommended practices, if it's new technologies, but trying to leverage those as quickly as we can just to improve pipeline safety.
Ms. Paris?
I think first a consideration is what we're doing here today is getting all the stakeholders involved and talking about these things. I mean, it's important that we all understand. I don't understand what my colleagues here do every day, and I don't expect them to know what I do every day. So it's important for us to have these discussions. Another point that they had made is this evolving technology, and for us as excavators, the GIS mapping is what stands out to us the most. The technology is readily available, and we really feel that it would help our industry.
Yes, well, I know there's been advancements just in the last 10 years as far as what's underneath the earth. And it's a beautiful thing that can be done. Beautiful technology, it works. Is that lacking?
In our industry, we don't see it, yeah. I mean, we're basically given a static black and white map or a drawing that shows where utilities are, and half the time, they're not correct. So we don't see the GIS mapping involved in our industry yet.
Mr. Carum?
Yes, I'd just like to say that, you know, the goal is not to be the safest form of transportation of hazardous materials. The goal is zero incidents. And, you know, one way to make some meaningful movement towards that is the widespread adoption of safety management systems.
Thank you very much. Okay. Ms. Titus, you're recognized for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. As I said, Nevada was the first state to have annual inspections and surveys of all the natural gas pipelines. Rather than every 5 years, we do it annually. It's a triple win. We find leaks earlier, which improves safety. We reduce greenhouse gases, and we create jobs. More people are surveying for these lines. Mr. Carum, if we had a national standard, would you expect to see similar results in other states, and we could have these 3 goals accomplished nationwide?
Yes, absolutely. I agree. A good leak detection and repair program with good standards on leak detection technology has multiple benefits, many of which you listed. Primarily for us, the biggest benefit is better safety outcomes. We continue to have too many home explosions and too many people dying from these leaks on pipelines. And you know, leak detection standards and strong repair criteria will make a difference on that. And so we're strong supporters of it. Many states, or some states, have adopted those, like Nevada, and that's wonderful to see. Some operators do go above and beyond and have those strict standards for themselves, but what we really need is what Congress asked PHMSA to do in 2020, and that's set a national standard where we know that all operators are held to the standard of finding leaks on a regular basis and repairing those leaks promptly.
As I mentioned in my remarks earlier, there was knowledge of leaks in some of these accidents, but they just weren't fixed. How about the sanctions on companies that don't fix the leaks, even if they know about them? Would those be adequate in the last legislation that came out of this committee, or should we look at that?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question one more time?
Well, if you discover a leak, but you don't fix it, and it results in an accident, what are the consequences?
Sure. Yes, we've seen the consequences over and over, unfortunately, of home explosions and fatalities. Of course, not every leak.
What are the bad consequences for the environment? I mean, what are the consequences for the company that found the leak and didn't fix it?
Well, that is left up to the enforcement to the investigation, whether it's an NTSB investigation and they find the root cause analysis, or if it's PHMSA or the state program that investigates. If the regulator finds that they were out of compliance and that they should have determined that it was a hazardous leak that they didn't repair, they could be held liable with enforcement. But the regulations are not written very specifically as to how they should appropriately grade a leak and what they determine to be hazardous. And I think
There's not a
the draft
scale-
PHMSA
there's not a
rule.
scale of fines or penalties or anything like that? It's just kind of ad
Yeah,
hoc?
there is a standard as to fines that are charged when an operator is found out of compliance. It's just sometimes it's difficult to find an operator out of compliance when the regulations are not written very prescriptively as to how they should handle leaks.
And do you think the legislation that came out of this committee last time deals with that sufficiently?
Well, the Pipes Act of 2020 directed PHMSA to write rules on finding leaks and repairing any leak that could be deemed hazardous. And so we would expect PHMSA to interpret that rule to do exactly what we're talking about, be prescriptive about how to grade leaks and how to ensure that they're repaired promptly.
Well, without this standard in place, since the legislation didn't pass, what you mentioned, some companies do it themselves. I mean, they're good companies, they want to be safe themselves. Could y'all address, what does a company do? Does it take it on itself to have these annual leak inspections, that sort of thing? Brag about yourselves and tell us what you're doing, if even without this standard in place. Mr. Black or Mr. Taylor?
Pipeline operators regulated by PHMSA have requirements for fixed intervals for inspecting their pipes through smart pigs that travel through the pipe. And they develop a risk-based schedule. If there are features that need to be researched more frequently through more smart pigs, they will. We're using advanced analytics right now with better predictive models to understand if we find a sign of corrosion or cracking or something, when is the best time when do you need to go out there and address that before, and what are the true threats? Certainly believe about the importance of doing smart pigs through pipelines and assessing features on the schedule that they need to be before an issue can become a problem.
Mr. Taylor?
Yes, for the natural gas industry and for the transmission side, we actually do more frequent patrols than what you're describing. So for class 1 and 2, you'll do once per year, but then in class 3 and 4, higher populated areas, it's more frequent than that. High consequence areas, you also have quarterly patrols. So you're, again, looking for those leaks that could be detrimental, could be hazardous, and making sure that you respond appropriately to address those. So from a transmission side, we're out there more frequently than what you're describing.
And I'll just say that patrols are not the same as surveys and are not always done with leak detection technology. Many operators, of course, do, but they're not required in the regulations.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Webster.
Mr. Larson, do you have questions? Some say yes, some say no. Sure. Go ahead.
Kind of going out of turn, and I appreciate that. For a variety of reasons, a lot going on today. But my first question is for Mr. Carum. In the 2020 Pipes Act, Congress created a grant that the Pipeline Safety Trust receives to provide technical assistance to communities and individuals in support of pipeline safety. And what does your organization do with those dollars?
Yes, this has been really critical funding for our organization, and we're grateful to Congress for authorizing it and to PHMSA for awarding it. We've spent the money on a number of ways to improve, to offer technical assistance to communities, and we really see that as a way to improve public engagement among the public, the pipeline industry, and the regulators. One of the ways to improve public engagement and to offer technical assistance is to educate the public. So we've used grant money on a number of things, including a primer on pipelines that we call the briefing papers. It's a 15-page document that are 15-part document. It's much longer than 15 pages. That includes information just such as the basics of how pipelines work, how they're regulated, how to find information about pipelines through the National Pipeline Mapping System and the PHMSA database, and a lot of information about emergency response and spill response planning. We've also produced guides that are stakeholder specific, like Landowner's Guide to Pipelines and Local Government Guide to Pipelines. We also use the grant money for some of our staff time. We get a lot of calls from members of the public, a lot of them that live along rights of way, that find us online. And they're often angry, frustrated, haven't gotten a lot of answers from anyone. And we maintain a good working relationship with PHMSA, with a lot of the state regulators, with the pipeline trade associations, and with a lot of individual operators. So we're often able to talk to these folks, find out why they're so frustrated, and connect them with the right people.
How many staff do you have
We have about 10 staff.
total? And yeah,
Yes, and
all in Bellingham?
no, we have about half are in Bellingham and half are spread out. COVID showed us that we were able to work remotely.
Yeah. So it's been over 20 years since much of the pipeline industry began implementing integrity management. Has integrity management improved pipeline safety compared to more prescriptive regulatory approach in the view of PST?
Yeah, but integrity management is a bit of a mixed bag. There are some areas you can look to that we've seen some improvement. I think the Distribution Integrity Management Program, also known as DIMP, while there's still lots of room for improvement, we can see some real progress there since DIMP has been implemented. Parts of transmission integrity management have proven to be effective. You know, using inline inspection tools to find corrosion has been successful. But I'll say the idea of integrity management puts the onus on the operator to identify all of the potential threats on their pipeline within these high consequence areas and create a plan to mitigate against those threats and implement that plan. So we would expect that when we look at the significant incidents within those areas where they're required to have integrity management, that we would have lower rates of significant failures, significant incidents, and we actually see the opposite, that there are lower failures outside of those areas. So I don't have a lot of answers as to why that's not working, but I know threat identification by operators is a problem, and you know, we need to figure out what's not working and how to fix it.
Thanks. Mr. Taylor, the EPA identified natural gas systems as a main source of methane emissions, and the Pipes Act of 2020 mandated that PHMSA finalize a rule of methane leak detection and repair programs, both for safety and to cut pollution, methane pollution. Did PHMSA's final rule from December reflect INGA's input?
Yes, it followed the GPAC recommendation, so generally it followed what we were recommending. We would like the opportunity to have it noticed and commented again. Again, there were a couple small things we'd like to improve on, but ultimately, yeah, it followed the GPAC recommendations.
It generally did, okay. I get when administrations come in, they want to do things differently. It just seemed like both on the methane leak and the other one I mentioned on the CO2 pipelines, that we told PHMSA to do this. These were nearly done. There was generally a lot of consensus. Like, this wasn't the fight to be had, but now we got to do this all over again. So it sounds like we get to do it all over again.
Yeah.
Is that about right?
Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Lamotha, you recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Panelists, thanks for joining us here today as we review pipeline issues and really remember what a great job they do for us in this country of transporting so much energy product when you consider that there's, you know, over 1.5 million miles of pipelines, and that they're the best alternative of moving energy, and certainly the most efficient and the most ecologically sound. I mean, when I hear people bad-mouthing pipelines, well, what's your alternative? Do you want to haul it all in trucks or try and get ships close enough to port, to, you know, ports that are still many miles from inland areas that need it? It's just, it's kind of sometimes a fruitless argument here. Of course, we need to improve pipeline safety, but I guess my questions would lead to the idea that what are we doing to make that as expeditious as possible? So I want a couple thoughts from Mr. Black. That I have a figure here that said oil through pipelines is 13 times safer than alternate modes, and even an Obama era administration had said that same conclusion. My home state of California, there's a lot being done to in the name of the environment, and so I guess pipelines being so strong that way, you would see we'd have more going on with pipeline efforts in California. So do you think, Mr. Black, that California's reluctance or flat-out opposition for permitting new pipelines to move these products, is it based on a safety concern, or is there something else happening there?
Thank you, Congressman. As you mentioned, even the PHMSA report for Congress and the incident data shows that pipelines are the safest way to move the energy that Americans use. The study showed that it's 13 times more likely to have an incident on those other modes. So the reason this fuel is moving on a pipeline or a train or a truck is because the Americans need it. So if the pipeline is stopped or is never able to enter the market, that fuel is moving on another mode, which is less safe. So if we are making permitting decisions based just on safety, we should be adding pipelines.
Yeah, where's the politics enter in, you think? Yeah, you don't want to touch that probably. As we know, California's moving rapidly, or trying to rapidly move towards banning fuel-powered vehicles, and they've already been very anti-oil exploration and on that order. So what else? Let's see. We do need permitting reform. What in the process? I know we had the Pipes Act in 2023 that took a leap at that, but what else could we be doing to reform PHMSA's process that is basically just holding up? You know, you talked about technology a little bit on the panel. There's more things we could be doing to have a speedier process so we actually can implement this. And I'm sure there's environmental concerns when you want to go out and dig up a pipeline to make repairs or improvements. What are some of the holdups, Mr. Black and Mr. Taylor?
Well, PHMSA can reduce its bureaucratic red tape, and Congress can help you do that. There's a special permit program that Congress created because you can't do one-size-fits-all regulations for the entire pipeline network. You know, wide diameter, narrow diameter, high pressure, low pressure, large, small, different operating environments. But that special permit program, which would allow a variance to the waivers, an equivalent way to approve safety, is basically broken because PHMSA has been taking too long and applying unnecessary conditions. In your bill that you reported in December of '23, you have reforms to the special permit process. Similarly, Congress can tell PHMSA, you need to update your repair criteria, your schedules to update to reflect the latest know-how in technologies and analytics. Let's use this MRI ultrasound type technology that's in smart pigs and update regulations. Let's use the engineering assessments that give us a more precise reading on where is an issue a problem and when it needs to be.
Thank you.
Congress can help push that.
Let me jump, Mr. Taylor, for a moment on that too. What are the roadblocks? How do we fix them?
Yes, from the 118th Congress, the classification rule, that would be very beneficial if we could get that completed. That would free up additional potential energy from, as I mentioned during my oral testimony, having where we've maybe reduced our MUP due to maximum allowable operating pressure due to a class change. So allowing that flexibility. The Technical Standards Committee having GPAC meet more frequently, the incorporation by reference, having more frequent review of those documents that are incorporated would allow the newer technologies, newer thought processes to be implemented much quicker and be implemented. And then lastly, that voluntary information sharing just would allow lessons learned to be more widely distributed and make sure that we can account for those.
Can these be done by executive action, or do we need to pass legislation? What are you running into? I'll stop, Mr. Chairman. Quickly.
If I can help, the voluntary information sharing needs action by Congress to create that safe space for collaboration, like the airline industry. Need Congress to act, and it's in your bill.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so I appreciate it indeed. In my home, for my California people that are watching, we're really seeing it isn't about the pipeline safety. It's about the politics of shutting down the use of this form of energy and not allowing pipelines or any other infrastructure. Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you.
Chairman reels back. Ms. Forshee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the ranking member for holding this hearing, and thank you to the witnesses for being here with us today. Mr. Carum, on August 14, 2020, two teenagers discovered a puddle of gasoline in the Oler Nature Preserve near Huntsville, North Carolina. More than 4 years later, with over 2 million gallons spilled, It remains one of, if not the largest gasoline spill on land in the United States, and cleanup is still in progress. Just last month, there was another leak on this same pipeline in Paulding County, Georgia, that temporarily shut down the pipeline. Most alarmingly, the fire department was not aware of the leak until reporters called to ask about it. What measures are in place to ensure that first responders and the public are aware of pipeline incidents? And furthermore, how should pipeline operators engage with the public in the aftermath of these incidents, especially ones with potential public health concerns?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So that particular incident on the Colonial Pipeline in Huntersville and a recent one on an energy transfer pipeline in Pennsylvania with jet fuel illustrate something that's really lacking in pipeline technology, and that's on leak detection. The best leak detection system on a liquid pipeline can detect down to a 1% loss of fuel throughput. And that is on a large pipeline like Colonial, that's a lot of product, and that's what we saw in Huntersville. And so a leak detection system won't necessarily pick up these small leaks that happen over time, and it often is the public that sees those. Specifically to your question, PHMSA requires operators to develop an emergency response plan, and that gets inspected. Part of that plan requires the operator to notify first responders and the public in the event of a failure. Sometimes those, when a failure does happen, we learn that the emergency response plan was not appropriate or sufficient. Other times, an operator doesn't follow the procedures in their emergency response plans, and we end up with situations like that.
Mr. Taylor, I also serve on the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, and I am interested in how new technologies are monitoring for methane leaks from natural gas pipelines. I know, for instance, that the Environmental Defense Fund recently launched a $90 million satellite to monitor both accidental and intentional methane gas releases. Did INJUR work with PHMSA on the final leak detection rules required by the 2020 Pipes Act? And do any of INJUR's companies use similar technology to monitor for leaks?
So I know some INGA companies are utilizing satellite technologies based off of the leak detection repair rule as it was proposed and worked through the process. That wouldn't be sensitive enough for leak detection capabilities of what we're trying to achieve. So we are trying to utilize new technologies where we can. There are more laser-based technologies that are applied to flights, so it could be fixed-wing aircraft, it could be helicopters, but those are some additional technologies that are able to detect a more sensitive leak, so meaning sensitive, detecting a much smaller leak along the pipeline right-of-way, but satellites today are not able to achieve that sensitivity. So it would be a very large leak, so like you mentioned, maybe it's where you intended to vent a lot of gas for whatever reason, if you were doing work or if there was an emergency event, maybe it can detect those types of things, but it's not going to see those very small leaks.
Mr. Black, according to the Department of Transportation's inventory of artificial intelligence use cases, PHMSA has explored the potential of AI to augment its rulemaking process. PHMSA has also funded research projects to develop AI-enabled pipeline inspection tools, a pipeline safety data management framework, emergency response training, and a pipeline corrosion management tool. Can you speak to the potential for AI to improve the pipeline safety practices of operators and emergency responders?
Thank you, Congresswoman. You're definitely onto something. We think AI and machine learning has great opportunities for improvements in pipeline safety. Pipeline technology right now produces terabytes of data from the smart pigs that travel inside a pig, and it would be great to have the opportunities to continue the use of machine learning to tease out of the data issues before they're a problem. In your bipartisan bill last time, you have a voluntary information sharing program that will create a safe space for operators and regulators and stakeholders in the industry to talk more about how to use that data, and it will help.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Stauber, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Black. I appreciate that comment. In order for us to win the AI war, we need energy via the pipelines. Mr. Taylor, what is the natural gas pipeline sector's perspective on the value of PHMSA's advisory committee?
Can you ask the question one more time?
What's your perspective on the advisory committees?
Okay, I'm sorry. Yes, thank you, Congressman. Very valuable. Having that meeting allows discussion of various new topics, new technologies, different ways to address safety concerns. If we are seeing new things pop up that we're not aware of, or that's something new, that we can bring the players together, the different parties together, and think about, okay, what is the right way to tackle this? How do we try to strive for zero incidents across the pipelines? So it's extremely important. Allows these new rules that we're talking about, again, like class location rule. How do we try to get that completed? We're going to need to have another GPAC discussion. So having that meeting as frequently as we can. Again, the last Congress had 2 times per year. The current charter says 4 times per year. Somewhere in that range would be extremely helpful to continue to have the dialogue, the conversation, and move rules forward, move new thoughts forward, move new technologies forward.
I think that, would you agree that GPAC has the ability, if technology arises in between those meetings, to call a session to say, here's new technology, here's where we can make it safer and we can implement it sooner rather than later?
So that's set up through PHMSA. PHMSA has to organize those discussions and get that meeting organized, and so it's really, we appreciate the benefit from Congress to try to get this completed and force that discussion, because it takes a lot of work, but it's ultimately very important to improve safety and advance that.
Do you think holding more frequent advisory meetings with key pipeline safety stakeholders strengthens PHMSA's rulemaking process?
It would definitely improve the process, because again, as we talk through these rules, regulations, we get the right parties together, make sure that we're considering all aspects, because again, it's extremely beneficial to get the public side together, get the industry side together, get the state entities, because through the last GPAC, when we talked through LDAR, we talked through class location, everybody brought in their different thoughts and their different concerns to make sure we come out with the best regulation we can. Ultimately, we want something that comes out that's technically accurate as well, because if something's put out there that we can't meet, that's not going to be beneficial to the industry, that's not going to be beneficial to the public.
Right. And so I think those are some things that'll come out of that meeting. I would just say that we know that pipelines are a very safe and effective way of moving energy. And I think all panelists here agree that safety is the number one priority. I think that if we met more often and used that technology and actually brought it to fruition, I do believe we can make it even safer. And this means that Mr. Carum would be out of a job if we make it completely safe, because then he couldn't come here and talk about more safety. But with all due respect, I think it's important. I think this is a very, very healthy discussion. There's that balance. You know, Mr. Carum, I read your testimony, and it's very sad when we have deaths, right? But I do believe that the industry is doing the best they can with the information given to them. I don't believe it's anything nefarious. We want to move together safely in this next century and with the technology we have. Because if we don't move that energy, we won't win the AI war. If we don't move that energy, more people in the northern climates are going to have difficulty getting through the winters. So I think it's important that we understand the value of the pipelines, and the safety is the number one priority. So I just want to thank all the witnesses for being here. Mr. Chair, thank you for holding this very important hearing, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Ms. Sykes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, for holding this hearing. Look forward to continuing discussions on how we can keep pipelines safe but active in our communities. As some of you may know, that on May 28, 2024, a natural gas-fueled explosion occurred at the Realty Tower building in Youngstown, Ohio. I don't represent Youngstown, Ohio. That was the former 13th Congressional District, and I hope this line of questioning does not continue to confuse people as to what communities I represent, but it is important to bring up because it is a significant topic of discussion. The explosion occurred at the base of the building, destroying the facade, throwing glass, brick, and other debris onto the sidewalk, and causing the first floor of the Chase Bank to collapse into the basement. The explosion tragically killed 27-year-old bank employee Akil Drake, who was found deceased in the basement, along with 9 other people who sustained injuries that required hospitalization. The significant structural damage to the 13-story building, which contained the bank and other offices, as well as a few residences. People deserve to feel safe in their homes and in their workplaces, and I want to express my sincere condolences to Akil's family and everyone else whose lives were impacted or been turned upside down due to this devastating explosion. At the time of the explosion, a 4-person scrap removal crew was working at the building's basement to remove and relocate utilities in preparation for a city's road improvement project. The NTSB found that during the work, a scrap removal worker cut through an inactive but still pressurized service line, resulting in a gas leak and a subsequent explosion. According to the NTSB, the explosion occurred just 6 minutes after the service line was cut. The NTSB says the investigation will focus on the pipeline operators' procedures and practices for meter removal, record keeping and abandoning gas facilities, ownership of the inactive service line, the companies associated with the Realty Tower building, and the scrap crews contractors' operational practices and policies for work crews. However, while NTSB continues their investigation into this tragedy, the explosion has had long-lasting consequences to the community, especially those who called the building home and those who had businesses there. In the aftermath, the 100-year-old building needed to be demolished, forcing residents of the neighboring apartment complex to be displaced for months while demolition occurred. This tragic pipeline explosion and the following displacement of residents demonstrates why this committee takes issues of pipeline safety so seriously. We must continue to work together to prevent accidents like these from happening again, including taking the NTSB's report and recommendations into account. So, Mr. Carum, how are pipeline operators supposed to indicate that a gas line is inactive?
Yeah, thank you for that question. As I understand it, there are no requirements for marking or identifying inactive service lines unless a one-call has been initiated, and in that case, they would. When there is an inactive service line, operators have some options on how to deal with that, how to discontinue that line, some of which allow pressurized gas to be in that section of the inactive service line. And so we would love to see more specificity in the regs around this.
Thank you. And Mr. Paris, just a pretty broad question. Have you seen accidents like this before where an excavator thought an inactive gas line meant that it could be cut? And if so, how should this type of accident be characterized as excavator damage or poor record keeping?
So to answer your first question, yes, we see this. There are many times that we come across abandoned old lines where we excavate and break those lines and have to either make that repair or come up with another plan. I'd like to go back to the importance of mapping, and I do think it is an issue with what data we're given and shown before excavation. I know a lot of the topics and incidents that we've talked about today are after pipeline construction is done and our job as excavators is over. But there's also an importance of getting those lines marked before construction starts when we're building these things in the ground from the start. So.
Thank you, Mr. Paris. You did an incredible job because my next question was going to be about mapping, and so you already answered in the first question. So with that, Mr. Chair, I yield back the remainder of my time.
Chair yields back. Commissioner Nils, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses that are here today. I'm happy that this subcommittee is kickstarting the pipeline reauthorization process. Again, I felt that last Congress's committee, we produced an excellent bill. It passed out of this committee on a bipartisan basis. I would like to commend both sides of the aisle, both sides working on this, for the hard work in producing a great bill. It is a shame. It's a shame that our Senate colleagues, they failed to have any hearing on this pipeline reauthorization and stalled the momentum we all garnered. And as we look to examine the pipeline reauthorization bill, there are several priorities that I wish to talk about and raise awareness. As a former law enforcement official, I strongly believe we need to protect. We have to protect our critical infrastructure. Mr. Black, can you talk about some of these environmental extremists, and they're out there, who encouraged violence against these pipeline infrastructure. And why is this dangerous? And what was included in the previous bill to counter these activists?
There have been violent attacks on pipelines, and there are loopholes in the energy statutes that prevent full prosecution of all of them. There have been attacks on pipelines before they have gone into service, and they're not covered. And then there have been attacks on pipelines operating right now to turn a valve. Now, a pipeline is a safe industrial piece of equipment operated by trained personnel, but not somebody who's just turning a valve, and that could hurt themselves, the public, or the environment. This committee, and thank you for your role as prior chairman of the subcommittee, would close those loopholes. Protest, fine. Violent attacks on pipelines can hurt themselves, the public, and the environment.
And higher civil penalties as well. We need to find these people. Thank you. Mr. Paris, it seems most believe that exemptions to the one call or that 811 process are detrimental. They're detrimental to damage prevention. Can you provide any examples of these types of exemptions and why you would want them reduced or eliminated?
Yeah, so some of the examples of exemptions specifically in the state of Pennsylvania include municipal utilities that are not required to be a part of the 811 or one-call system. Therefore, when a one-call is placed, they do not have to go and mark the lines. Another one example is agriculture. So I believe in the state of Pennsylvania, they are not required to put a one-call in anything above 18 inches. We do find more than not that when excavating, we come across these lines and we do our due diligence. We don't get a positive response rate from the locate.
Sure.
We go to pothole and visualize where these lines are. They're not where they say they are, or they're not marked at all. So yes, these exemptions are hard for our industry in construction and excavating.
I can't agree with you more. You know, one of the greatest provisions in the previous bill was the section 28, inspection of these in-service breakout tanks. I know APIs isn't here, but these breakout tanks, you know, they're a critical part of the liquid energy product, you know, supply chain. The breakout tanks are used to store product that is not currently in the line to allow for optimum sequencing and to temporarily hold product, you know, from the main pipeline. I believe there are more than 8,500 breakout tanks in service that support hazardous liquids pipelines operations. And I find it interesting, you know, operators are required to inspect these in-service breakout tanks in accordance to PHMSA regulations, right? Tank engineering design, we're all about safety. Everybody's concerned about safety. I agree, safety should be the top priority. The engineering design in these tanks and the liner performance has improved dramatically over the past 10 to 15 years, as demonstrated by the PHMSA data. I guess there's PHMSA says an incident data for the 12-year period from 2010 to 2022 shows a 0.5% incident rate from releases from tank floors due to cracking or pinhole corrosion. And allowing operators to base inspection frequency on risk modeling as outlined by API will ensure that these inspections are not conducted unnecessarily, while again keeping safety in the front of mind. I'm assuming, Mr. Block, you would agree with these risk-based inspections? I mean, it takes like 30,000 man-hours. I mean, you got to drain the whole damn thing. You got to put somebody down in there. We should have the technology to do this and do it based on risk.
Absolutely, Congressman. PHMSA should not be requiring inspections of a storage tank on a fixed interval, when the technical standard now that EPA and many states have adopted is for risk-based inspections. It reduces worker safety threats, air pollutant emissions, hazardous waste. Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Taylor, I'm assuming you'd agree. Thank you, sir.
Yes, Congressman.
I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Ms. Friedman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair Webster and Ranking Member Titus, and for the witnesses for coming here today. Unfortunately, California is no stranger to natural gas transmission pipeline disasters. 15 years ago, of course, we had the explosion in the San Bruno neighborhood in Northern California, where several people were killed and 47 million standard cubic feet of natural gas was released. I believe 8 people were killed and about 38 homes were destroyed, and we all still grieve for them in California. And closer to home for me in Los Angeles, thousands of people are still suffering health impacts because of the leak at Aliso Canyon. So the question is, are we now safer since San Bruno? And have we put into place everything we need to keep our community safe? And I believe the answer is no, because the last 2 years have been the deadliest 2-year period for pipelines since the San Bruno explosion. In the past 2 years alone, 30 people have tragically lost their lives due to pipeline safety incidents. And I hope to work with the subcommittee, with everyone on the subcommittee, to develop robust standards to prevent these disasters from occurring. Now, LA has a high number of liquid and natural gas pipelines through very densely populated areas, including in my district in Glendale, in Burbank, Los Angeles, and Pasadena. During the LA fires, we saw a lot of ignitions happening, at the homes that were impacted by fire because the natural gas pipelines in the natural gas in the homes was on fire. Now, I toured the Eaton Canyon area 1 and 2 and 3 days after the fire, and those plumes of natural gas flames came up from thousands and thousands of homes. In fact, there were victims walking around their former homes looking to collect their personal items, trying to navigate around 7-8 foot tall walls of flame in their houses because those natural gas pipelines were still on and they were still on fire. And I saw ignitions 2 days later happening because of winds pushing those flames around. So my question for Mr. Taylor is, what did your members, what steps did they take during those fires to minimize that kind of incident? And why were should those ignitions still been happening 2-3 days after the fire? How do we make sure that we don't have the public walking through these burn areas, through their homes, while they have to navigate around very intense flame plumes, I don't even know what to call them, coming out of their former homes?
Yeah, so thank you, Congressman. Congresswoman, that specific type of fire and that specific type of instance would be tied more towards the distribution system. And so, again, from a transmission side, we could potentially isolate, don't know the specific details of all the situation there and how that gas is being fed to that exact location in the areas you're speaking of, but that would be more of a distribution type focus, distribution type question on how they could potentially isolate those areas.
Okay, and just so that you have it in your head, we're talking thousands of homes, an entire, more than one neighborhood. So not just one house at a time, but you had entire neighborhoods that were impacted by this. Mr. Taylor, as you know better than me, fire valves are inexpensive spring-loaded valves that are designed to melt before the pipeline fails, sealing the pipeline and preventing natural gas from fueling fires in these kinds of incidents. Why is it important to install fire valves in gas distribution pipelines, especially for communities like we have in Los Angeles that are fire-prone and earthquake-prone, just disaster-prone in general?
I don't know if you're asking me or Mr. Carum, but
Whoever, yeah.
yeah. So again, from our standpoint, that would be more distribution focused. We wouldn't have that type of application for transmission pipelines, but it would make sense for distribution. I'll let Mr. Carum answer the question now as well.
Yeah, thank you for that question, and I'm so sorry about the devastation in your district and around your state. And yes, what you're talking about is on the distribution systems, which are the service lines that go into each home and building. And you can install these fire valves on service lines very easily. And they have a low melting point polymer that holds the valve open, and when they're exposed to heat, that polymer melts and the valve automatically closes. Because we see in times of emergency, it's often difficult and it takes time to shut off the valves around a system on a distribution system. And so these would, in the case of a fire, whether it be a home fire that started, in the kitchen and spread, or if it's something more widespread like a wildfire through a community, these could mitigate the extra damage caused by the gas service to the homes.
Thank you both for your answers, and I yield back.
Jelly yields back. Mr. Owens, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Webster and Ranking Member Titus. I want to thank you again for today's hearing and opportunities to learn about the American industry and innovation. It can be liberated from the yoke of outdated and over-regulation. Operating under expired authorizations, pipelines deserve this focus and consideration due to the positive impact they have on everyday lives, heating our homes, cooking our food, to powering American manufacturing. It's important we take these opportunities today to shatter any mistruths about pipelines' impact on the environment. I have a couple of questions and a few comments. But Mr. Black, can you explain how pipelines often result in lowering carbon dioxide emissions?
Liquid pipelines are primarily powered by electricity. And the other modes that energy could travel over, diesel, generates the power for those pumps. It's diesel emissions related to train and truck. So there are less carbon emissions. We are the most environmentally friendly way to move the liquid energy that Americans use.
Great, thank you. I have another question for you. For those who are not aware, pipelines, specifically liquid transmission pipelines, are one of the most heavily regulated industries in this country. Can you describe the multiple layers of safety regulations placed on these pipelines? And do more regulations make people and environments more safe?
Well, you're right. Liquid pipelines are very heavily regulated, federal, state, and even sometimes local. It starts right here, right, with oversight over the industry and over PHMSA and telling PHMSA what it should do. And then PHMSA, as the regulator, the enforcer, states can have intra-state regulations. States can partner with PHMSA to be the inspector even of an interstate pipeline. And then in some cases, there are local requirements about pipeline activity or construction. So very carefully regulated, comprehensive set of regulations, few gaps.
Okay. I had that last question. Do more regulations make people and environment more safe?
If they're smart regulations, right? Sometimes we have PHMSA being maybe 20 years behind. It would be beneficial for the environment if we would update those regulations. But smart regulation absolutely has been contributing to the continued decrease in pipeline safety incidents.
Okay. Just have a few comments here. Through various acts passed through this committee, Congress continues to authorize innovative technologies and practices that would improve safety in this field. I want to repeat that. We continue to authorize innovative technologies and practices that would improve the safety, and yet, unfortunately, there's been no implementation of this innovation due to Biden's bureaucratic hurdles. The intended pilot programs never moved forward, and the authorization for programs have laxed. This, unfortunately, is another example of the free market industry moving faster than a non-innovative culture of bureaucratic government. We will never know how much damage could have been mitigated or lives saved if bureaucrats just got out of the way and just let this process move forward. For those who watch, I just want to make sure you understand what we're seeing here. This is what's called the innovators. This is what you guys do. Every single day of your lives, you have a passion for it. You have an interest in things that we don't have interest in doing. And what you expect very simply is predictability, to be given an opportunity to give the best service, to get a great reputation so you can make a great profit, and thousands of Americans benefit from that. We have to recognize that the innovators is where this is where we changed. I will say this, I'm thankful that we have a majority now of innovators. People have been in business for themselves. We're on your side. We're gonna figure out how to listen to you and provide innovative legislation. And we have a president who understands what innovation is all about, who wants this industry to drive the world's economy. So I'm excited about where we are today. Just know that we're listening, and we're looking forward to getting more impact from people like yourself, all you stakeholders, to make sure that we truly do make our mark in the world. So thank you so much. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Carson.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member. Thank you all. Regarding our critical transportation infrastructure, including pipeline infrastructure, can you describe some of the most important cybersecurity and information technology challenges that have to be addressed, considering the growing number of malign actors that need to be reeled in? What are your thoughts about the ransomware attacks on entities like the Colonial Pipeline? company, which disrupted gasoline supplies throughout the East Coast. How many of these issues were impacted by insufficient staffing and basically legacy equipment? Are there any specific ways that our committee can provide assistance regarding these issues and vulnerabilities, quite frankly?
I could first take a shot at answering that. So from our standpoint, we know it's critically important. We know we're critical infrastructure, so we, as INGA member companies, are trying to take additional steps to help prevent that and try to address it. But my focus is more PHMSA related, so I don't get more into the TSA and various other areas that would be regulatory introduction for additional cybersecurity measures. But we definitely know as an industry it's critically important, and we're taking additional steps to mitigate that concern.
You're absolutely right, Congressman. Cybersecurity is very important. The threats are real that pipeline operators face, and they're facing them every day. The way that these operators are trying to address them is through improved cybersecurity technology and defenses, developing industry standards on the use of cybersecurity to protect the SCADA systems that power the operation of the pipeline, and then partnering with governments, CISA, Department of Homeland Security, to help the national security personnel tell us what they can about threats, including in classified settings. Very important to protect our pipeline infrastructure from cyber threats.
Congressman, I'd like to touch on cybersecurity when it comes to GIS mapping, because a lot of the questions that we receive when we talk about GIS mapping is, well, how can we protect that data? And we obviously see that that's a potential issue, but I'd like to point all of your attention to a case study that's being done in Minnesota, where they're doing a task called distributive data, where they are giving the excavators and the people involved, the utilities and facility owners, that data for the life of the ticket and only for the life of the ticket. So it is a way to make sure that the data is being secured. So I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
A little different perspective on cybersecurity. You know, as integrity management regulations require an operator to identify every potential threat against their system. And I don't think cybersecurity has historically been included in those potential threats, but it is a potential threat, and it should be part of an integrity management plan.
Yes, sir. Thank you all. Yield back, Chairman.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, and of course, our four witnesses. I'd like to take a moment to first acknowledge that last week in my district in the town of Cicero, Illinois, there was an explosion and it killed one person. It is, of course, under investigation. The cause of the explosion will be determined in part by that investigation. And of course, it's so important that PHMSA be able to support state pipeline safety inspectors in their work. So let me begin my questions. Mr. Carum, the state of Illinois recently passed a law pausing the development of new carbon dioxide pipelines, as you are probably aware, until a federal safety standard exists for those pipelines. In fact, the bill that this committee passed last year required PHMSA to complete a rulemaking establishing minimum safety standards for gaseous carbon dioxide pipelines. My question is this: why is it important to set federal safety standards before we build more carbon dioxide pipelines, in your opinion?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I want to start by saying that this past Saturday marked the 5-year anniversary of the Denbury failure in Satartia, Mississippi, that sent 45 plus people to the hospital that night 5 years ago. So there are gaping regulatory gaps in the minimum safety regulations for carbon dioxide pipelines. Depending on the phase of the CO2, it wouldn't be subject to any minimum safety regulations. And the regulations fall short in a number of other areas, including emergency response and plume dispersion modeling, impurities, and a host of other areas. And that draft PHMSA rule that was submitted for publication did a good job addressing most of those risks. Now, there is a congressional limitation on PHMSA's authority, the non-application clause, that says that PHMSA cannot adopt design, construction, or initial testing standards on existing pipelines. So knowing that we have these regulatory gaps, some of them would fall under design or construction standards. Any pipelines that get built before those new standards come out, those design and construction standards, if they're included in PHMSA's rule, would not apply to what's already built. And so we are just encouraging PHMSA to move quickly on its rulemaking so that any pipelines that are built will be following the modernized standards.
Thank you. My next question has to do with the proposed safety rule issued by the Biden administration as required by the 2011 Pipeline Safety Law, but currently placed on hold. One provision of the proposed rule focused on the right-of-way of carbon dioxide pipelines, specifically for a pipeline right-of-way within 2 miles of any building. Operators would be required to justify why that pipeline location was chosen. In addition, the proposed rule would have required those operators to establish an emergency planning zone extending 2 miles on either side of their pipelines to make sure that there's a plan in case of an emergency. I believe we can and must do more to ensure rigorous safety standards and transparency with communities that are impacted by these pipelines. My question, can you talk about the consequences, Mr. Carum, to local communities if the proposed rules don't move forward?
Sure. Well, I think that those proposed rules did a good job addressing many of the regulatory gaps that we've identified and that we're concerned about and think could lead to increased failures. And by not adopting those rules, we think that communities could be left with less protection. And so we do worry about that.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes Mr. Westerman for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the witnesses for being here today. An important subject when we talk about pipeline safety and innovation for the future. But, you know, an area of concern that I have is us actually being able to build pipelines. We already know they're very safe and efficient way of transporting gases and liquids. Yet we have a burdensome permitting process that makes it very difficult to build new pipelines here in our country. And we have probably a bigger need for more pipeline distribution systems than we've ever had, especially when you look at the demands for more electricity and what are we going to use to generate that electricity. We have an abundant amount of natural gas here, but if we can't move it to where it's needed, then it doesn't do us nearly as much good. So what I would like to ask each witness is how you perceive if permitting delays are driving up prices, if all this duplicative permitting and the judicial review process, does that add anything to safety of pipelines? And what reforms specifically in the permitting area do you think would be beneficial for being able not just to make pipelines safer, but to be able to build more pipelines? I'll start with you, Mr. Black.
Thank you, Congressman, and I represent Liquids Pipelines, and I want to thank you for your personal leadership on permitting reform. You're absolutely right, it's very important. As we've been discussing today, the pipeline is the safest mode of transporting liquid energy that Americans use, so if we can expand pipelines, we're improving safety. On permitting reform, we support, and this will not be a surprise to you, quick decisions by permitting agencies, judicial reform, so entire permits are not thrown out by some small provision, and then continued use of the nationwide Permit 12 process for pipelines. If we can move better permitting reform that allows for durable permits, we'll be able to expand the safest energy transportation infrastructure we have.
Thank you, Mr. Black. Mr. Taylor?
Thank you, Mr. Congressman. As Mr. Black stated, again, very similar situation for the natural gas side. We definitely need permitting reform. We would definitely support that. Obviously, we'd like to advance our projects as quickly as we can. One step we could take in the very quick would be the classification rule. Again, that would free up some additional capacity because that would allow maximum allowable operating pressures to be reinstated back to where they originally were, and that's going to build some capacity within existing pipeline infrastructure. So that would be extremely helpful for us. It would be extremely helpful to get that rule completed as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Mr. Paris?
So from the excavator side, when permitting comes into play, if permits are not approved in a timely basis, then we are out of work, and we have to put employees on layoff or they're on unemployment. We've seen that in the past. I'd like to emphasize, though, that we're working with our customers in the safest fashion that we can, and we're always looking to improve the way we can be safe when it comes to pipeline infrastructure. Back in the day, it was about a finger-pointing kind of thing, but now it's about working together and talking about what the real issues are and moving forward with that. I'd also like to point out within the permitting process is part of the design phase of the project. So what's important to get these permits through faster and more safer is getting back to these basics in what I believe these marked utilities and mapping and making sure that these are laid out within the permitting process.
Good. Mr. Carum?
Yes, so this is really outside of the focus, the primary focus of our organization. The focus is really on safety regulations. But I will say, as a public safety advocate, I am grateful for a robust permitting process that includes opportunities for public input. I see it as a balance between efficiency and responsibility. And I'm sure there are places where efficiency can be progress on efficiency can be made, and we'll just be there to make sure that those changes are responsible and safety forward.
Do you see that it's imbalance right now? Do you think the permitting laws and the multiple agencies that you have to go through, is it balanced between efficiency and safety now, or do you think we need more regulations or less regulations?
Again, it's really outside of the main part of our work, and I am grateful for a robust process that has opportunity for public input.
All right. Then I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes Mr. Mann for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here today. I'm Tracy Mann. I represent the Big First District of Kansas, which is 60 primarily rural counties in the eastern or western part of my state. Kansas has over 48,000 miles of gas pipelines and 11,000 miles of liquid pipelines that run throughout the state to help transport these goods across the country. I believe the pipeline is one of the safest and most efficient modes of transportation for energy and are essential to delivering energy from where it's produced to where it's needed around the country. A handful of questions. First off, for you, Mr. Black, what are some examples of how you feel like FSMA needs to modernize its pipeline safety requirements?
PHMSA regulations are over 20 years old, Congressman, in many aspects. Pipelines use modern technologies to assess pipelines through smart pigs that travel inside a pipeline looking for features like corrosions and cracks. And then pipelines use modern engineering assessment techniques and predictive analytics that can help us understand with more precision what issues need to be addressed and when. So we have that information, that better safety technology and that better program, but PHMSA regulations are slow to react and they're 20 years old. So then we need a special permit process to allow a variance to achieve the same level of protection but smarter, but that process is broken. So two ways that PHMSA can improve is to allow update of repair criteria to reflect technology and then to approve the special permit process and implement safety technology demonstration programs in a bureaucratic-free way.
That was my next question is, can you explain to the committee the potential benefits of the pipeline safety technology demonstration pilot program?
Sure. This would give PHMSA the data to have the confidence to update their regulations. We'll be able to show that new technologies traveling through the pipe and new engineering analytics will let us more efficiently focus on what we now know are the real threats on the proper schedule. So if the demonstration program can help PHMSA understand that, then they'll have the confidence. One more, could have a demonstration program on the use of drone technologies or satellites to replace the fixed-wing right-of-ways patrols that pipeline operators have to do. Then maybe we can do more patrols for the same amount of money, but not if we have inflexible PHMSA regulations.
I could not agree more. We've got to embrace technology for everyone's benefit, including to make everything more safe. Question for you, Mr. Taylor. The class location rule is one of PHMSA's outstanding mandates. Please describe the importance of this regulation to pipeline operators.
Yes, yeah, it's extremely important. Again, it would allow some flexibility instead of going out and replacing, say, 1,000 feet of pipe. Now I can apply Subpart O, or again, additional assessments, preventative mitigative measures. I'm going to look for those specific threats that are applicable from launcher to receiver, and I'm going to run a battery of tools through that pipeline to make sure I'm properly addressing or assessing those pipeline threats. It also reduces impacts to landowners because, again, now I'm not either pressure testing or replacing that pipe. I can run that additional technology through the pipeline, and then in addition, it's improvement to the environment because now I'm not going to have emissions related to doing all that additional work. I can just, again, run the new technologies as Mr. Black described.
Great. And how long has your sector advocated for this updated rule?
It's been over 2 decades.
Over 20 years. There
Yes,
you go.
sir.
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
sir.
Well, that says a lot right there. Thank you all for being here today. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. I now recognize Chairman Rouser for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate our panelists being here today. I hate that I had to pop out and I missed the benefit of the Q&A the last 35 minutes or so. But let me look at this, or let me ask you from a broad standpoint. As far as the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee for this year, next year, this Congress, what's the number 1 or 2 items of oversight that you think are really critically important in this space? And then from a legislative standpoint too, obviously we're going to be working on a surface transportation reauthorization, and not that that deals directly, obviously, with pipelines, but anything in that space that you think we need to be pursuing legislatively, I'm curious about as well. Mr. Black, start.
Well, hearings like today to conduct oversight over PHMSA, encouraging them to reduce bureaucracy and red tape and embrace innovation. On legislative, a targeted pipeline safety reauthorization bill like you have, work that you've been doing on continued use of the nationwide permit program for oil and gas. And in your Coast Guard reauthorization bill in the committee last Congress, you encouraged the National Response Center to allow online incident notification rather than just making a call and waiting for someone to answer the phone. Those 3 legislative priorities would really help.
Mr. Taylor?
Yes, sir. Again, as Mr. Black mentioned, the 118th Congress had class location rule mentioned, again, for the same reasons I just mentioned to Mr. Mann. The Technical Standards Committee, having that more frequent meeting with the GPAC, LPAC, that would, again, advance pipeline safety, discuss new technologies, look at what's working, what's not, and find opportunities to improve. The incorporation by reference, evaluating what are some of the more recent documents or recommended practices that are being referenced by PHMSA. Those would be extremely important because there are some standards in there that are 20 years old. We obviously know technology has significantly changed in the past 20 years, so should be referencing newer documents. The voluntary information sharing, that's another great aspect that we could have a proper space to make sure that we can collect that information and can share that out so that different operators can learn from maybe a mistake or a mishap, a near miss, an incident from another operator. And then that workforce development, just trying to have PHMSA have the right resources available at their needs to be able to conduct inspections and audits as they need to.
I think for us, it sounds simple, but it's very complex, and that's just a full and balanced statewide enforcement of damage prevention laws, which includes full participation in an 811 process, accurate and timely locating for all facility owners, and the opportunity to move the needle towards GIS mapping.
Mr. Carum?
Yeah, for us, it's the increased resources to PHMSA and the state programs that was identified in the bill, and appreciate industry support on that as well. The increased enforcement authority to PHMSA, I think, will make a difference. I want to reiterate support for, standardizing damage prevention. A couple things that were not in the bill would be the implementation of fire valves, and then more broadly, figuring out a path forward to encourage widespread adoption of safety management systems.
Now, the next item is not directly related to pipeline safety, but an issue of concern of mine. Several years ago, we had the shutdown of the Colonial Pipeline. Cybersecurity in that realm. Talk to me about our strengths and weaknesses and anything that we need to be doing as a Congress, as a House, as a Senate to help you address those issues better.
Cybersecurity is very important. We have many threats pipelines face every day. The way the pipeline operators are approaching this is to increase investment in cybersecurity defenses, develop best practices among the industry for protecting the systems that operate the pipeline, and then partnering with government so that we can learn from the national security and the intelligence community about those threats. So it's making sure that government has whatever resources it needs just on this issue to help identify the threats for us to partner together so we don't have to have voluntary shutdowns on ransomware like we had with Colonial or cyber breaches of operating equipment. Important issue. Thank you.
Anybody else real quick?
Not necessarily my area of focus, but just again, maybe piggybacking off the volunteer information sharing, maybe there's opportunities to better communicate some of the concerns or risks if we're seeing certain issues that pop up across the industry. Just how do we get that information out there as quickly as possible so that all operators can put up their defenses or develop new defenses, whatever the concern is, but just trying to share that information more quickly, more broadly, so that we can address it.
Yeah. I'm out of time, but any quick thought?
The operations side's a little bit out of my wheelhouse, but I had pointed to Congressman Carson about a case study that's being done when it comes to GIS mapping out of the state of Minnesota, and it's proven that there's work against cybersecurity and protection of that kind of thing is working with our kind of data.
Very quickly, I'd just encourage operators to identify cyber threats in their threat identification for integrity management and mitigate against those threats as part of their integrity management program, in addition to specific prescriptive cybersecurity regulations.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back, and I recognize Member Burleson for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just got back from a conference, a global conference called ARC, Alliance for Responsible Citizenship. We had world leaders from most of the Western nations, Britain, the United States, Canada, a lot of the European nations. And really the common theme was that we've had a lost decade, if not 2 decades, of economic growth, of industrialization that's been outsourced to countries like China that are not exactly the cleanest country, to send your industry to. And so the other thing that concerned me is the question of, history tends to repeat itself, and about every 80 to 90 years, the world reserve currency moves to a different nation. And we in the United States, we're well beyond that 80 or 90 years. We're at about 120 years being the world reserve currency. It generally follows the nation that is the industrial powerhouse in the world, the manufacturing leader. That being said, energy costs are a key driver of this. Cheap, abundant, and affordable energy is what every manufacturer is seeking. And so with that question, Mr. Black, in your testimony, you emphasized that expanding American energy production will send new supply to the market and pressure prices downward, as building energy infrastructure like pipelines will help us deliver more energy to the American people. Can you highlight on why investments in energy infrastructure is essential if we're going to maintain world dominance economically?
We have tremendous energy supplies in the United States and, of course, Canada with our integrated market, both in liquids and in natural gas. When we can get that energy to market, to the people and the businesses who use it, that produces downward pressure on prices. If we have additional energy made that we don't need in this country, we can sell it in the world market, helping our trade balance and helping push global prices down and increasing global prosperity. But in order to do that, you have to be able to expand pipeline capacity. In both cases, it's the most economical, most reliable way to move that energy to where it can be beneficially used.
It's my belief that it's the one common denominator that the poor and the rich have to deal with is the cost of energy. Unfortunately, the poor have a much more, as a percentage of their income, greater harm from those costs.
Yes.
And so would you agree with me when I say, show me a nation that is abundant in energy and cost-effective, affordable energy, and I'll show you a nation that has low poverty rates?
Affordable, reliable energy lifts people out of poverty, lifts nations out of poverty, and helps them grow. Yes.
Let me ask this. As far as you mentioned in your testimony that smart pipeline policies will promote the pipeline energy infrastructure that we need to deliver and keep American energy dominance. Can you describe what is smart pipeline policies?
Well, one is making targeted improvements to PHMSA rather than adding new mandates, harsh penalties that aren't called for. If we can help the public understand that the pipeline network, liquids and gas, is well regulated and it's safe, there will be more support for that pipeline expansion. We need PHMSA on the case showing that they're doing things, that they are holding companies accountable, and that they are reassuring the public that pipelines are safe. We'll be able to expand pipelines better than we have been.
Thank you. Mr. Taylor, in your testimony, you highlight the important role that the Gas Pipeline Advisory Committee plays, and yet since 2021, that committee has only convened 3 times. How often are they supposed to convene?
The charter states they should be meeting approximately 4 times per year. So obviously not meeting that charter.
Can you expand on the role and how that impacts the industry? How them not meeting impacts the industry.
Yes, sir. So it definitely impacts the industry because, again, you can get different thought processes involved. Obviously, there's public, there's the industry, there's PHMSA. So you're getting the different players involved and discuss key safety concerns, advancements, technology changes. So you're just trying to look at the regulations and figure out how can we continue to move and strive for zero incidents across the industry.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. I recognize myself for 5 minutes of questions. First, I want to thank Chairman Webster and Ranking Member Titus for holding this hearing today, and thank you to the witnesses for your testimony and insight. Ohio contains over 100 pipeline operators that oversee 56,000 miles of distribution lines, over 10,000 miles of transmission lines, and over 1,100 miles of gathering lines. My district is home to the Buckeye Express and Tennessee Gas Pipeline, both of which provide pivotal natural gas for the state and the country. With a large network of pipelines, I am proud to work with my colleagues on this committee to pass legislation that ensures that our pipelines are safe across the great state of Ohio and the nation. People across the country want lower energy costs, and that means the United States needs to unleash its natural resources. I'm proud that this administration wants to prioritize oil and natural gas production to create jobs and economic development for both consumers and industries. Mr. Paris, what has been Pennsylvania's experience with shale gas, and how have you worked to ensure that this energy is developed and transported safely?
So like I said before, we are working with our customer on a day-to-day basis to improve safety. Safety is number one, and it is a part of every task that we complete. Now, as far as our local economy, the gas industry, since it has come to Pennsylvania, it has bolstered our local economies. We have seen businesses that were ready to shut their doors be brought back to life. So we take that as a responsibility on us to make sure that we're installing these pipelines correctly and following safe practices.
Thank you. More often than not, regulations have hindered industry from adopting the best technologies, practices, and standards that allow for their businesses to thrive. I was disappointed to learn in your testimony, Mr. Black, about how the Pipeline Safety Technology Demonstration Pilot Program was created to test some of the latest and advanced inspection programs and analytics was ineffective because of the previous administration's practices and policies. Mr. Black, could you please elaborate on the benefits of this program if it were to be implemented properly?
Thank you. This was a great opportunity that Congress created and we missed as a nation, and I hope that we can retry that. The Pipeline Safety Technology Demonstration Program was put by PHMSA into the special permit process, and the special permit process is broken. There are conditions unrelated to variances that are requested. There are delays. There were unusual procedures for temporary R&D programs that we just don't need. So if Congress can reauthorize the Pipeline Safety Technology Pilot Demonstration Program and tell PHMSA, don't apply those unnecessary conditions, let's get to work, let's find a way to benefit from the newer technologies and improve PHMSA regulations. But we'll need congressional action.
Thank you. Is there anyone on the panel that disagrees that that Congress should re-implement this program? Okay, thank you. I yield back. Are there any further questions from any members of the subcommittee who have not been recognized? Seeing none, that concludes our hearing for today. I would like to thank each of the witnesses for your testimony. The subcommittee stands adjourned.